Our first descent into the abyss begins with a familiar terror, the chilling legend of the ghost ship. But this is a version few have heard, an account whispered by those who hunt for the spectral echoes of the sea. It begins with the Mary Celeste, perhaps the most famous maritime mystery of all time. A brigantine found drifting off the Azores in 1872, perfectly intact, with all her lifeboats present, but utterly devoid of her crew of 10 souls. What happened to them? The official records offer only speculation. Piracy, mutiny, or sudden disaster. But the truth, according to the logbook pages that were mysteriously found and authenticated years later, points to something infinitely more terrifying and far less human. The recovered log was not found on the ship, but washed ashore years later in a bottle. Its final entries, penned in the frantic, deteriorating hand of the ship's first mate, David, painted a picture of creeping psychological horror. The early entries spoke of rough weather, but then the focus shifted. David wrote of a sound, a humming, high-pitched noise that seemed to resonate not through the air, but through the very hull of the ship, directly into the crew's bones. He initially dismissed it as the sound of the wind or the rigging, but the noise persisted even in absolute calm. The crew began to suffer from severe, synchronized migraines and auditory hallucinations. They grew irritable, paranoid, and began staring out at the open water for hours on end, as if expecting something to surface. The captain, Benjamin Briggs, noted the strange behavioral changes and ordered a thorough search of the ship, finding nothing amiss. He confined the most troubled sailors to their quarters, attempting to maintain order. But the sound only grew louder. David's log entries mention how the humming would sometimes coalesce into a fleeting, melodic sound, a song of unearthly beauty and profound sorrow, seeming to call them towards the waves. One night, the entry simply read, "The song is clear now. It's not in the air. It's in the water, vibrating up through the floorboards. It demands attention. The men, they are lining up on the deck. Their eyes are black and empty. They look happy, so happy." The final entry, scrawled sideways across the page, was the most disturbing. It wasn't written by David, but was clearly written in a different, impossibly elegant script that looked faintly wet, as if penned underwater. "They listened, they descended. Silence is now the master." But the most inexplicable detail came with the last documented day of the Mary Celeste before her discovery. The ship was found with a thick, almost black layer of crystallized salt coating the entire exterior, from the deck to the mastheads. Analysis showed it was not typical sea salt, but a mineral compound consistent with deposits found thousands of feet below the photic zone, the dark, deepest parts of the ocean. When the recovery crew finally boarded the silent vessel, they discovered a single disturbing item on the galley table. A bowl of oatmeal, still warm, with 3 distinct fingerprints pressed into the sticky surface, as if the person who was about to eat had suddenly been called away. But when the investigators tried to lift the bowl, they found it fused to the table by the same black deep-sea crystal that coated the hull. It was not salt, but a hardened biological residue. And to this day, sailors in that region report a faint, high-pitched hum coming from the depths, sometimes accompanied by a sound like 10 men sighing in unison, moments before the sea turns unnaturally calm and the air grows freezing cold. The Mary Celeste remains a riddle, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most dangerous thing at sea is not the storm, but the call of the deep. This excerpt was found in the private archives of a retired marine salvage diver who refuses to work south of the Azores. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of the Pacific, where the ocean floor holds secrets that should never be disturbed. We move from the ghost ship to a modern marvel of engineering turned into a floating tomb, the Ethelred. Located in a hostile, isolated region of the Pacific Ocean, the Ethelred was an ultra-deep-water drilling rig tasked with accessing oil reserves beneath a previously unexplored tectonic plate. For the crew of 150, it was a high-paying, grueling job, 24/7 labor in a world of steel, noise, and crushing isolation. The trouble began when they passed the 10,000-foot mark with the drill line. The initial core samples contained nothing unusual, just rock and prehistoric sediment. But the deeper they went, the more unusual the geological data became. The sensors started picking up impossible seismic readings, rhythmic, low-frequency pulses that were too uniform to be natural. The lead geologist, Dr. Kenji Ito, insisted the readings were artifacts, noise from the drilling process. But the crew knew better. They started experiencing strange pressure fluctuations and a persistent, metallic odor that defied air filtration. The platform's advanced sonar system began showing anomalies, massive, slow-moving objects in the abyssal water below, too large and too structurally complex to be known marine life. Kenji theorized they were deep-sea thermal vents or previously unknown rock formations. The psychological toll was heavy. The crew, already under stress, became increasingly agitated. They complained of vivid nightmares involving impossibly large shadows and crushing weight. They started reporting whispers and scratching sounds coming up through the pipe casings, even when the drill was static. The tipping point came when the primary drill head, a tool capable of grinding through granite, was suddenly and violently sheared off at the base. The telemetry showed a near instantaneous, colossal opposing force. When the rig finally hauled up the damaged pipe section, the metal wasn't twisted or stressed. It was cut almost surgically, as if by something inconceivably sharp and strong. The rig manager, desperate to maintain the schedule and fearful of a corporate investigation, ordered the crew to send down a specialized armored deep-sea camera to assess the site of the break. What they saw on the reinforced monitor screen chilled the blood of every man watching. The camera, illuminated by powerful floodlights, showed the severed drill head resting on the ocean floor, but surrounding it were structures.
They looked like colossal, calcified tunnels spiraling into the sediment, clearly not natural. And then the camera tilted, revealing the source of the force, a fleeting glimpse of something smooth and perfectly black, moving with deliberate intelligence. It wasn't an animal. It was too vast, too geometric, and emitted a faint, cold, phosphorescent glow that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. As the camera zoomed in on one of the tunnel entrances, a strange, rhythmic tapping began echoing in the rig's control room, the same rhythm they had detected in the seismic readings. Then, Kenji screamed, pointing at the monitor. The black shape was receding, but on the severed drill head, a shimmering film was rapidly growing, a biological substance that was dark green and pulsated slowly. Before they could pull the camera up, the monitor went pure static, accompanied by a sound like a massive, organic jaw clamping shut. All contact with the seabed was lost. The captain ordered an immediate, panicked retreat, but as the Ethelred began retracting its anchors, the rig shuddered violently. Then, the rhythmic tapping returned, louder now, and closer, seeming to be coming from beneath the rig itself. The sonar lit up, showing multiple, massive, complex shapes rising from the darkness, surrounding the rig. They were moving faster now. The final communication from the Ethelred was a garbled, terrified message from the captain, punctuated by screaming and the screech of tearing metal. "It's not oil, it's feeding. The tunnels, they've reached the..." When the search parties arrived days later, they found the Ethelred missing. There was no oil slick, no debris field, nothing to suggest a sinking, only an unnaturally calm, circular patch of water where the rig had been. And in that patch, the surface of the water was coated with a thin, almost invisible film of dark green biological matter, slowly expanding outwards, pulsating to a rhythm that matched the silent, rhythmic tapping that came from 10,000 feet below. This log was recovered from a sealed emergency beacon that drifted into the shipping lanes, its casing coated in a bizarre, non-human oil. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of forgotten history, where the ghosts of a terrible tragedy refuse to find peace.
Our third story takes us to the bitter, ice-cold waters of the North Atlantic, the graveyard of countless vessels, but none so famous as the RMS Titanic. It is 1996, and a research submersible, the Triton, is conducting a controversial deep-sea salvage operation near the wreck site, 12,500 feet below the surface. The crew consisted of Dr. Helena Voss, a renowned maritime historian, and 2 veteran deep-sea pilots. Helena was obsessed with recovering a specific set of artifacts from the debris field, a collection of documents rumored to have been sealed in a safe that survived the sinking. Their initial dives were successful, recovering silverware and personal effects, but the atmosphere on the Triton was heavy, oppressive. The utter silence of the abyss, broken only by the hum of their machinery, was psychologically taxing. On their fifth dive, while navigating the debris field, one of the pilots, Markov, reported seeing something impossible through the thick viewport, a fleeting light. It was not the light of their sub or the flash of a camera, but a distinct, pulsating, orange-red glow appearing for less than a second before vanishing. It looked exactly like a distress flare, the kind fired from a sinking ship. Helena dismissed it as bioluminescence or a hallucination caused by nitrogen narcosis, but Markov swore he had seen it. The next night, the light returned, closer this time, and brighter. It was unmistakable, a flare burning with impossible defiance in the dark, cold depths, far below the surface where any chemical flare could survive. The team started experiencing technical glitches. Communications with the support ship above would drop out for seconds at a time, replaced by a sudden rush of static that sounded unnervingly like the screaming of hundreds of voices. The sub's temperature sensors showed sharp, inexplicable drops, plunging the cockpit into a chilling, damp cold that felt unnatural. During their deepest penetration into the wreckage, near the massive, rusted bow section, the flare appeared again, this time directly outside the viewport. It was vivid, defiant, and surrounded by a cloud of black, silt-like debris. But the most terrifying detail was that the flare was not floating. It was held aloft by a spectral hand, pale, waterlogged, and impossibly long. Helena, despite her terror, recorded the event. As she did, the apparition seemed to turn its eyeless gaze towards the sub. The screaming static in their comms peaked, becoming a unified, desperate roar of human anguish and the splintering sound of wood and metal. Markov, driven to madness, started hitting the controls, trying to surface immediately. In the ensuing chaos, the Triton scraped against a piece of wreckage. The external lights shorted out, plunging the sub into total darkness. When the emergency lights flickered on, the viewport was filled with the terrifying sight of faces, not spectral illusions, but hundreds of pale, wide-eyed, water-damaged faces pressed against the glass, their silent, gaping mouths screaming the fate that had claimed them over 80 years ago. Helena, paralyzed by terror, saw the final image, a single, colossal flare burning with an intense, blinding white light being pressed against the viewport. And in the momentary blinding light, she saw not the faces, but the reflection of their own sub on the glass, coated in a thick layer of ice, rapidly forming on the inside of the Triton's hull, despite the internal heaters being on full blast. When the Triton finally surfaced, hours behind schedule, the crew was found in a state of advanced hypothermia, huddled together. The artifacts were lost. The sub's hull was intact, but its external cameras were shattered. Helena's recording showed nothing but static, yet the air inside the submersible reeked of sulfur and salt water, and the metal walls of the cockpit were covered in a thin, crystalline film of ice, the ice that should not have been there. And beneath the ice, faintly etched into the metal, was a single, repeating word written in the elegant, looping script of a bygone era. Help. Now, let's move to the final story,
one that came from the darkest corners of human isolation, where the sea and the mind become one terrifying trap.
Our final chilling tale is not about a sunken ship or a monster in the deep, but about the terrifying, fragile boundary between sanity and the sea. It takes place in 1903 on a remote, wave-battered granite pillar, the Eilean Moor Lighthouse, off the coast of Scotland, tended by a solitary, aging keeper named Angus MacLeod. The Eilean Moor mystery is famed for the disappearance of 3 keepers, but Angus's solitary posting was years before that event, a precursor that few dare to speak of. Angus was a man of routine, meticulous and steadfast. He loved the isolation, the roar of the ocean, the rhythmic flash of his own light cutting through the eternal gloom. But the isolation began to wear on him. His only companion was the deafening silence broken by the ceaseless, hungry roar of the sea. He started noticing the weather changing in unsettling ways. The storms became strangely personal, battering the tower with deliberate, almost malicious fury. Then the storms would stop instantly, leaving an eerie, glass-like calm. One day, while repairing the lantern glass, Angus found a gift. Wedged between the storm-blasted rocks near the foundation was a perfect, exquisitely carved piece of whalebone, shaped into the figure of a woman with long, flowing hair. It was polished smooth, felt warm to the touch, and seemed to hum with faint, internal energy. Angus, believing it a lucky charm, placed it on his desk. That night, the whalebone figure began to whisper. It was a soft, seductive sound, speaking in a language Angus didn't know, yet somehow understood perfectly, a language of promises, of escape from the crushing loneliness. The voice promised to bring him company. Angus's sanity began to unravel. He started writing letters to his family filled with rambling descriptions of the woman in the tower and her beautiful songs. He spoke of the whalebone figure coming to life in the darkest hours, dancing across his desk, its eyes 2 tiny embedded pieces of black shell glowing. He started keeping the light off for increasingly long periods, claiming the woman told him the light angered the others that lived just beneath the waves. The official log entries became bizarre, chronicling not the weather, but his conversations with the figurine, complete with long, rambling replies written in a tiny, spidery hand that was not his own. One cold, stormy evening, a passing fishing trawler reported the Eilean Moor light was completely dark, a dangerous anomaly. A relief boat was dispatched immediately. When they reached the tower, the steel door was unlocked. The lamp was fully fueled, but dark. The entire interior of the lighthouse was coated in a thin layer of fine white sand, sand that smelled of the deep ocean, yet was entirely dry. Angus was gone. No sign of a struggle, no broken glass, and no note. The only things left were his logbook and the whalebone figurine sitting on his desk. The final entry in the log, written in Angus's shaky hand, read, "She brought them. They are here. They smile like she does, but their skin is the color of drowned things. They have come for the light. They have come for the company. They are beckoning me to the edge, and the sea has stopped roaring. It is only singing now." The last line, scribbled below, was written in the figurine's spidery script and seemed to confirm the horror. The company is complete. The tower is ours. The rescue team searched the tower top to bottom. They found nothing. But as they prepared to leave, one of the men picked up the whalebone figure to inspect it. As he did, a sudden, powerful wave slammed the side of the lighthouse, and the man swore he heard a chorus of delighted laughter echoing up the granite stairs. When he looked down at the figure, he saw the tiny black shell eyes had been replaced by two miniature shimmering pearls. He dropped it instantly. The pearls dissolved, and the figure returned to its cold, empty state. Angus MacLeod was never seen again, but locals swear that sometimes, on the calmest, darkest nights, the light of Eilean Moor flashes with an eerie, rhythmic pattern that spells out no nautical code, but rather a single, desperate word in Morse: companion. Which of these tales of the deep unsettled you the most? Tell us in the comments, and remember, keep your lights on, because the Watchman is still watching.
You've seen their stories, but the darkness